20 years ago, if you told me, hey, Charles, in 20 years, VARs are going to be agents of change for break fix companies, I would have said, you're crazy. I said that's never going to happen. But it's happening. It's happening slowly but surely. Will it continue? We'll see. I think that there's a good chance that it will, just based on the number of these cyber bars that are cropping up all over the place. And they have customers. That's the thing. They've actually got customers and or partners that they're working with. And it's right now, it's a mixture of both, right? They're not just going through the channel, they're going through both MSPs and going direct to customers. So MSPs don't, this is the message less for the MSP, but more for the break fix company. Break fix companies out there listening to this episode, change now, accept the future. The cyber VARs are coming. Never heard of a cyber VAR before? Well, don't worry. I kind of made it up. At least I can't see anything on the web about anything related to a cyber VAR. I'll explain why I made it up and what role I think it has in the global lexicon of managed services worldwide. But this concept of a cyber value added reseller is really critical because we're starting to see a lot more of them. They're popping up all over the place, and they have a role. Whether you like it or not, they have a role to play. And to understand their role, you have to understand who they are, what function they serve, how you could use them to your advantage if you're an MSP or if you're a customer. If you're an MSP, you have to understand how those cyber VARs might be interacting with your customers. Yeah, you heard me right. They probably are already talking to your customers. And if there is a better phrase for if you can't beat them, join them, it applies to the cyber VAR, specifically how MSPs need to view, understand cyber VARs, and ultimately come to peace or at least some reconciliation with this concept and be able to have a peaceful, hopefully harmonious, and I do believe very synergistic relationship with the cyber VAR, because I do think that that's possible. So let's dive right in and we'll talk about what is a cyber VAR. The concept of cyber consultants, right? You heard, if you listen to this podcast, especially during the pandemic, we talked a lot about cyber consultants, little shops that were cropping up all over the place. Actually, they started a little bit before the pandemic, but they really flourished in the middle of the pandemic. And it caused a lot of angst amongst MSPs because they were disruptive in some bad ways, and I'm talking about cyber consulting firms interfering in the truest sense of the word with an existing MSP customer relationship. And that's no good, right? Especially when the MSP is doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? They're not deficient in any real way. They're doing what they're being asked to do. They're proactive. Doesn't mean they're perfect, but what they don't need is a third party consulting firm coming in there and second guessing every little thing that the MSP is saying to their customer, right? I'm talking about things like, which firewall should you be using? Well, if a consulting firm comes in and says, well, I think you ought to use brand X instead of brand Z, that's, preferences aside, that's not really the job of a third party to come in there and interfere, right? That's the role of the MSP. At least the end user has placed their trust in the MSP, and that should be respected. So that cyber consulting firm became quite popular. Popular is the wrong term. They became quite numerous, right? They popped up all over the place, all over the world. And the cyber VAR, the cyber value added reseller, is kind of an evolution or a mutation. I don't know how you call it. It's an evolution. Maybe some of you look at it as a mutation, but they've changed from the cyber consulting firm because they're now offering products. They're reselling other technologies. Now, they're not really reselling like a traditional VAR would be typically a hardware sometimes a software, but predominantly a hardware reseller, right? They would take a physical device like a storage device, a server, desktop, a printer, firewall, whatever. They would resell it. They would add on their services. That's what a value added reseller would do. But they would lead with, and their revenue would be dominating uh, with hardware. That's where they made their money. As distinctly different from, let's say, an MSP, where they traditionally, and I think still today, mostly derive their revenue, or at least they derive their profit margin, mostly from managed services, not from reselling piece of hardware, piece of software. Right? Makes sense? So these cyber VARs are starting to crop up all over the place. They're fairly new. They've been, most of the companies I'm talking to, they're like 2, 3 years old. Now, the people that run them, they're not new, right? They're distinctly different than those cyber consulting companies who most of them were, kind of very new in their career in security, and I think had probably a little bit more maturing to go. They need to be cooked in the oven a little bit more, to use a baking term. But these cyber VARs, a lot of them, even though the companies are new, they're being led, they're being owned and operated by people who have very seasoned operating experience, right? They are not new to this industry by any means. They've been around, but they come from what I would classify as a distinctly non-managed services origin or background. They're not MSPs. They're not traditionally people who came from other MSP businesses. So I'm just painting a picture, painting a landscape, not unlike what you see behind me here, so that you guys understand what I'm talking about when I refer to a cyber VAR. Now, what is the role of a cyber VAR? What did they want to do? Well, I've distilled three general areas where I think the cyber VAR today is attempting to stake a claim. And I think two of them are quite legitimate. The third, questionable. We'll get into that in a moment. But two of these three areas where the cyber VARs are attempting to land and form a beachhead um, is is really critical to understand not only the cyber VAR and their mentality and what their purpose is, but how are you going to respond to them? Now, I'm gonna phrase this in terms of the MSP landscape. That's what I'm talking about. This is the title of this podcast, the MSP zone. It's not the cyber VAR zone. So you as an MSP need to understand motives. You have to understand origin, where are they coming from, what do they intend, are they a threat to you? Are they not a threat to you? And how should you respond to these cyber VARs? Because they're out there. Like I said, they are talking to your customers, or they're talking to prospective customers of yours. You need to be aware of it. So here are my kind of three scenarios. And I'll start with the first one, which is the cyber VAR interacting with the end user, right? This would be a customer of an MSP, potentially, or actually, because I think both is going on, both scenarios. What would you do? Right. And I think that there's a lot to be said, but let's be fair and neutral and look at this objectively. So a cyber VAR selling or interacting with a end user customer, whether they're managed or not managed by an MSP. We'll contemplate both scenarios here. What are the benefits? Is there a downside to this type of scenario? If the customer is not engaged with an MSP, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Now, I've said before, most of the cyber VARs that I am talking to, they are not looking at themselves for the most part as an MSP. It doesn't mean that they aren't subject to certification and audit, because some of them are reaching far enough into the IT stack and they are doing things on a persistent, ongoing basis that raise them to a level where they would have to be certified or audited because they are inserting themselves into the supply chain. We'll talk about that in a moment. But let's just talk about a kind of a standard, traditional, not very developed or mature relationship. The cyber VAR interacting with an end user, what are the upsides? Education, number one. Education. Bringing the concepts of modern day cyber hygiene to a customer who may not have otherwise heard about this stuff before from anybody. Remember, this first scenario is the customer is not involved with an MSP. If they're not involved with an MSP, where are they getting their information from? Who are they hearing it from? They're certainly not going to conferences. They're probably not going to IT websites. You know who they're hearing cyber related information from? Websites that might have a passing, news story, a news website, maybe a television news that talks about the latest breach or hack. They're probably hearing it from insurance agents who are saying to them, hey, have you thought about getting some sort of cyber coverage? And then when they say yes, then they're being exposed to questionnaires that they have no clue what they're asking for. MFA, what's MFA? Do we back up our data? I didn't even know we had to back up our data. No, I don't think we do, right? So they're probably getting a little bit of information from different sources, but none of it is being presented to the customer in the form of long-term, constructive, strategic guidance. They're not getting it. So up comes along the cyber VAR and says, hey, I've got some great technologies. I can do pen testing. I can do vulnerability scanning. I can do or sell you technologies that can do these things. You should think about these things. And of course, that's going to resonate with a customer because, again, this could be the first time that they're hearing from anybody in a constructive, strategic manner about why they ought to be considering cybersecurity solutions. Notice I don't say managed services because that's not what I hear them talking about, them being the cyber VAR. I am not talking about managed services in this scenario. I'm just talking about the concepts of cybersecurity technologies and services. So education is an undeniable benefit. It's an undeniable good. And I think that no one would reasonably say, hey, that's a bad for these VARs to be talking to customers about cybersecurity. So I think that that's one thing. Number two, I kind of alluded to bringing new technologies to the awareness of the customer who may not have previously been aware that this stuff exists, right? You're talking, think about how many customer organizations out there in the world who still think that traditional antivirus is probably good enough for their business. There's probably a fair number of companies out there that still believe that. They have no idea about EDR. They have no idea what MDR means, what it stands for. They don't have any clue about why it's better for them than legacy antivirus, right? Because no one's ever bothered to teach them about it, right? They're certainly not getting it from their local computer retail store that they go to buy their iPads or their televisions and things of that nature. So new technologies, new concepts, new cyber defenses. These things are all good, all useful information. Again, probably not getting it from anybody. So the cyber VAR comes along and starts that conversation. Yeah, it's going to be a good thing. And I want to tie this first scenario off with one critical reminder. I am not suggesting, nor do I see the cyber VAR talking or messaging these services in any way like they are managed IT services. I don't see that phrase on the website. I don't see that phrase in their marketing, in their sales language. And when they talk to me or our team here at MSP Alliance, I don't hear them talking about their company as an MSP at all. Now, it doesn't mean that they're not coming very close to the edge, but it's important for you to understand that the cyber VAR, at least today, views themselves not as an MSP, but as something different. Whether you like it or not, they're positioning themselves not as MSP, but as value added reseller or cyber consultant or whatever they want to view it as. I don't think they even have a name. They're all using cyber. They're all using consulting and they're all using services, not managed. But I think cyber VAR is a very appropriate term for what they're actually doing and what they're actually delivering. So that's the first scenario. The second scenario, which I think is also very helpful, I personally would like to see this second scenario grow. I would like to see the cyber VAR become dominant in this next area, because I think that this is one of the biggest weak parts of our flank in the managed services profession that we have, and we need to do something about it yesterday. And what is that? The cyber VAR selling into the break fix company. Why would a cyber VAR sell to a break fix company? Well, funny enough, again, based off of what the cyber VAR is telling us, they're coming across a lot of consulting firms, just general break fix companies. Some of them could themselves be VARs. Some of them could be consulting firms. Some of them could be just, you know, break fix time and materials, kind of traditional legacy IT shops that are still out there performing. Maybe they're small, but they've still sustained themselves with a customer base that's been loyal over the last 10 years. And if they're doing something in managed services, it's pretty minuscule, right? It's very low key. It's certainly not dominating the bulk of their revenue yet. So painting a picture here for you guys, what would be the benefit of a cyber VAR interacting with and influencing that type of a break fix company? Huge upside. Let's go through it real quickly. Driving change. Just the ability for someone other than the MSP Alliance or every single cybersecurity framework on the planet Earth, or most of the insurance agents who are selling some sort of cyber policy, right? There's a growing list of people in a chorus talking about why break fix needs to change. And if it takes the cyber VAR to push this issue over the edge and finally make a difference, I'm fine. I'm fine to have them join the fight. But I think that having a cyber VAR talking to a break fix company and selling them on the concept of maybe you ought to start thinking about adding EDR to your line card. Maybe you ought to start doing some pen testing for your customers. Maybe you ought to start doing some vulnerability scanning for your customers, doing some backups for your customers, doing some, managing passwords, things of that nature. Does this sound like managed services? All of these could be, managed services. Maybe not pen testing, but almost all these things could be and are managed services delivered by or capable of being delivered by an MSP. But the fact is that when the VAR is talking to the break fix company, they're bringing up a similar notion, not calling it managed services, but calling it cyber security technology, cybersecurity tools, cybersecurity services, whatever their phrase is, and bringing that awareness to the break fix company who is not currently successful or willing or doesn't understand how to bring those types of technologies to a customer base. The cyber VAR is a catalyst for change. And I am fine with that. I think you should be fine with that because, as I've said many, many times, you can go back to all previous episodes, previous articles, previous sessions that I've delivered, for 10, 15 years now. The break fix company is dead. It should die. The business model should go away today. It has no further use in our modern society. That doesn't mean that I'm against consulting, and I'm not saying that. I've never said that. But what I'm saying is a reactive mode of IT management is not what we currently need. We need to get rid of that model and replace it today with proactive managed IT services. I don't think anyone would really disagree with that. If you do, I would love to hear from you and know the reason why. But I certainly haven't heard of anybody saying that that's a bad thing. And so the cyber VAR as a catalyst for change, of getting rid of that break fix mentality, and at least getting rid of the mentality. What it's replaced with is going to be managed services. It's not going to be anything else. What are they going to do? They're not going to just stop being a break fix reactive IT shop and then become something else. They're going to most likely become an MSP because that's what the customers really want. So does this make sense, folks? The VAR educating and influencing a break fix company by bringing modern day technologies and tools to a company that has been resistant to delivering those types of services to a customer base that probably really wants them, probably needs them badly, desperately. That is a very unique concept. And far be it for me to say, don't do it. No, I think it should be done because they got to listen to somebody. They have to hear the message from someone about why they need to ditch break fix and move to proactive. So that's the first one. The second benefit of the cyber VAR interacting with the break fix company is to improve cyber hygiene. And I'm not talking about the end user. Here I'm talking about the break fix company. The break fix community out there, and I'm talking about those of you who generate at least 50% or more of your revenue from non-managed services revenue. You probably need to have a thorough review of your internal operational procedures, your controls, your policies. You have to look at things and say to yourself, am I as strong and secure as I need to be to protect myself? Because if I can't protect myself, I can't protect my customers. And I think the CyberVAR has a huge role to play. In fact, I'll tell you a little quick story. I talked to I didn't call him a CyberVAR. I won't name who the company is, but they would be described as a CyberVAR by my definition. They were excited about their new role as we were discussing it and helping to become an agent of change for a lot of the providers that they work with. And they said, we work with about 100 or so quote unquote MSPs. Now, I think that they fully agreed with me that probably a lot of them were very early on in their maturity scale, and that's fine. Still, a lot of them had some room for growth. That's fine. But the CyberVAR loved the idea that they could be a catalyst, an accelerant for improving the cyber maturity hygiene of these break fix companies and getting them rapidly into a position of being a true MSP. Funny thing that you would have a VAR helping a break fix company become an MSP. Yeah. Never thought the day would come, but there you heard it from me. I actually think it's happening. I know it's happening. So driving change, improving cyber hygiene, all fantastically important things that the cyber VAR needs to continue to do. And I think that they're in a good position to do it right now because either the break fix company is going to listen to that message or they're going to get breached and they're going to go out of business because of that breach, because they failed to do something that is expected of them and they failed to meet the minimum level of cyber hygiene that we have today. I don't want that to happen. You don't want that to happen. Insurance companies don't want that to happen. So the role of the cyber VAR to improve that, I'm all for it. Believe me. And I want to make another really crystal clear statement to all of you. In no way is the cyber VAR, based on my discussions to date, looking at educating the break fix companies that they're working with on becoming better MSPs. They're not doing that, although I think that that's an eventual outcome. Their purpose is very narrow. It's very, very defined. The cyber VAR really only wants to engage with these break fix providers on the line card of solutions that the cyber VAR is bringing to the table. What are those line cards? I've alluded to them already, but I'll go over them right now. For the most part, they are dominating in these kind of following areas: penetration services, pen testing, vulnerability scanning, SOC, Security Operations Center, or SIM services, EDR, MDR technologies, some password management, and really that's it. I don't see them doing a lot of backup. I don't see them doing a lot of other. I think that those are kind of the 4 or 5 really dominant technologies that the cyber VAR that we're seeing are pushing downstream. But they're not talking about it again as a managed service. They're almost anticipating that their provider, the partner provider that they're talking to and working with, they're the ones that are going to be the MSP. That's a really critical distinction because I've had enough conversations with these VARs now that they really have no desire to become an MSP. They don't even want to be considered in the same category as an MSP. I think I know why, which brings us very quickly to the third and last scenario that I want to talk about, which is as much not a warning, but more of a constructive guidance for the cyber VAR to become successful is to be aware of their own vulnerability, their own risks in this ecosystem that we call the cybersecurity supply chain. The third area where the cyber VAR is actively coming up is in interacting with actual managed service providers. I'll tell you why this would happen, because this is actually one scenario that I'm seeing right now. And that is the cyber VAR encounters a customer, and the customer has an existing relationship with an actual MSP. And so the actual MSP and actual customer now have a cyber VAR entering the relationship. And here's where there has to be some structure. There has to be some rules of engagement when it comes to hierarchy of who is in charge, who's responsible. And I'll go through why I think that this is a critical, delicate relationship that must be acknowledged and must be discussed in our community in order for it to not blow up in our faces. So why would the VAR be interacting with an actual MSP? Well, as I said, in the scenario where a customer was the entity that the cyber VAR was talking to, and then all of a sudden the customer says, oh, by the way, meet my MSP. They help us. They've been helping us for the last 10 years. And then the cyber VAR is in this awkward scenario where they're saying, well, we provide EDR. And then the MSP says something like, well, so do we. And then the cyber VAR says, well, the customer isn't buying it from you. And then the MSP says, I know. We've been offering it to them for the last 5 years, but they've rejected it every single time. Actual story. So you have two entities approaching the same problem, the same entity, the same customer from two different vantage points. Now have to decide, are they going to work in concert? Are they going to work against each other? You could see how that would be a very delicate balance, a delicate relationship that could misfire for both sides. It could misfire for both the VAR and the MSP. I've actually seen firsthand, I was a witness in a case involving this exact scenario where there was a VAR/consulting company, an actual MSP, and a customer. And they were all in litigation. And they were all in that scenario because there was a failure to understand and recognize the hierarchy of who is responsible for doing what. And that is not what I want to see. Believe me, I don't want to see that continue at all because it's no good for anybody. Here's some general thoughts about why the cyber VAR selling to the MSP is potentially dangerous. One, the provider thinks that they're an MSP, but they really aren't. Right? That's kind of like the first scenario we talked about, right? The break fix scenario. Now imagine an actual company that calls themselves an MSP, but they're really more on the immature side. And so a cyber VAR comes hopping along and says, hey, I notice you're not really doing anything in these security areas. Would you like to partner with us and we can help you? Right? That's legitimate. I have no problem with that. Helping augment existing MSP services. What would that really look like? Here's where the danger gets in, right? If a cyber VAR comes to an actual MSP and says, hey, you know what, would you like us to augment your help desk and start to do after hours, weekend um, SOC or triage for security related, incidents. Well, under that scenario, the cyber VAR has crossed the line, and now they are no longer acting as a VAR. They're now acting more as an MSP. And you guessed it, that cyber VAR is now under a legitimate scenario to be certified and audited, meaning that there is a legitimate right for any third party downstream to be able to say, who is that entity? Who is that cyber VAR? What are they doing? And what level of access do they have? Because they appear to be operating as an MSP. And in that scenario that I just articulated, they absolutely are acting as an MSP because they're starting to interject themselves in the supply chain as a entity that has persistent, ongoing, logical access to some customer data and some access to customer environments and networks. That's fair game. They should be certified. They should be audited. End of story. Does the cyber VAR have a legitimate role in helping a matured MSP become better? No, no, they do not. In that scenario, the cyber VAR has to recognize their own pecking order, their own position in the hierarchy, and they have to understand that when dealing with a legitimate, mature MSP who understands, regardless of their size, they understand how to do things. They have good policies, procedures. They've been certified. Maybe they have an MSP Verify report. Maybe they have a SOC 2 report. Those types of MSPs who have responsibility to customers as their primary outsourced IT service provider, there is no room for a cyber VAR to interject themselves into that relationship and attempt to preempt, disrupt, or replace an MSP with the VAR's own services because number one, it would be improper. Number two, it would probably violate the agreement that the MSP has with their customer. And number three, the cyber VAR does not have anything close to the breadth of services that the mature MSP has. They're probably the MSP that is already delivering EDR, MFA, backup, SOC, penetration services through themselves or through a third-party relationship, vulnerability scanning, most likely through their own set of tools that they have, as well as RMM, ticketing systems, and all the other things that the cyber VAR probably doesn't even have. They don't even know what to do with that stuff, but the MSP does. And in that last scenario, there is a real potential for conflict that I would like to not see happen. And I would like to see, you know, the MSP community and the cyber VAR community and the customers to really become aware of what is the unique role of each entity. And knowing that is going to make things a lot easier. So to recap, the cyber VAR has a very real function that I think, quite frankly, is going to be very helpful to our profession because it's going to do one of two things. It's going to shake out the break fix provider and either tell them, get out of the way or join the fight and become a legitimate service provider, proactive service provider. And that starts with becoming aware of their own lack of cyber hygiene, becoming aware of that, and then first becoming cyber hygienic as a break fix company. And then as they transition to proactive managed IT services, beginning to push those technologies and those services out to their customers. And if the cyber VAR is helpful in doing that, I'm all for it. I say, welcome. We need more of you on our side doing that type of thing. And again, it's weird. 20 years ago, if you told me, hey, Charles, in 20 years, VARs are going to be agents of change for break fix companies, I would have said, you're crazy. I said that's never going to happen. But It's happening. It's happening slowly but surely. Will it continue? We'll see. I think that there's a good chance that it will, just based on the number of these cyber bars that are cropping up all over the place. And they have customers. That's the thing. They've actually got customers and or partners that they're working with. And it's right now, it's a mixture of both, right? They're not just going through the channel, they're going through both MSPs and going direct to customers. So MSPs don't, this is the message less for the MSP, but more for the break fix company. Break fix companies out there listening to this episode, change now, accept the future, become cyber hygienic, become proactive in your IT service delivery. Throw away your break fix model and adopt managed services. And if you talk to a cyber VAR, or if you're not talking to them, but you expect a knock on your door one day soon, because it's going to come. It's either going to come from them knocking on your door, or they're going to come knocking to your customer's door, and they're going to convince your customer that you, the break fix company, are probably dangerous to them and they got to get you out of the way. I wouldn't want to be in that position. So start thinking about, how do you become an MSP today? Or maybe there's something else out there in the world for you to do, but it's probably not going to be in IT. So I hope this was helpful. The cyber VAR, we're going to monitor this. We'll keep you updated as things evolve. But I think that this is a really, it's certainly an interesting business model. I couldn't have predicted it, a number of years ago, but it's here, and you have to embrace things as they arrive and as they present themselves. And right now, I think that the cyber VAR community, as it grows, is going to be a absolute necessary agent for change to deal with reactive break fix IT providers who are reluctant to change. And we need to address that. It's far too long. So until next time, stay safe.